Hello and welcome to another episode of Fundy Tidings. I'm your host, Jay Remer, and with me today is Hailey Flaro. Hailey is the Executive Director of Ability New Brunswick. Welcome to the show, Hailey.
Thank you for having me.
This is so exciting. I know that people with mobility disabilities have experienced a lot of additional challenges during COVID, so it seemed to me like a great time to raise awareness of your organization and see how things are going and what we can do to help. So when did Ability New Brunswick begin, and who does your organization actually serve?
Wonderful. So actually 2021 marks our 65th anniversary delivering services in New Brunswick. So we started 65 years ago. We were actually founded on a national level by veterans that were stuck in Toronto Hospital after World War II that were injured by bullets to the spine, for example. And this one gentleman, John Council, looked at the rest of the veterans and said, we do not want to spend the rest of our lives in hospital or in convalescent homes. That's what they were slated for at the time. And these were not modern homes. These were where you were basically end of life, even if you had lots of living left to do. So their efforts resulted in better awareness of rehabilitation and potential of people with a disability, better pensions for veterans, and just general better community awareness of the abilities and potential of people with a disability. So it's been 65 years now with a diversity of services. Who we work with is our youngest service participant client is 2 years old, a little boy with cerebral palsy, and our most senior is 108, a woman that wants to live as long as she can in her home and avoid a nursing home placement, and I have no doubt that she will. I only hope that I have that longevity. So a mobility disability may mean living with a spinal cord injury, multiple sclerosis, arthritis, amputation, stroke, cerebral palsy, spina bifida. There's many conditions.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. We have a friend in common, Carla Rockwell, who won, I guess, a writing award from you all last year. And I've known her for quite some time. She's very eloquent, and you're lucky to have her advocating for you. What is the scale, though, of the challenge in New Brunswick, and how do we sort of compare to the rest of Canada?
So New Brunswick has the second highest rate of disability in Canada, second only to Nova Scotia. So about 26.7% of New Brunswickers have some form of a disability. And the most common type, next only to flexibility and pain disabilities, is mobility, about 73,000 New Brunswickers. So it's really important that we're designing communities, looking at programs, offering services to our most vulnerable citizens, that we look with a disability lens on how we design programs. In addition, people with a disability in New Brunswick and single mothers are the two most impoverished populations in this province. So it tends to be, not everyone lives in poverty, it tends to be a population most vulnerable to poverty simply because living with a disability is costly. So the number I mentioned, the 26.7, doesn't include those living in First Nation communities or living in long-term care homes, because Stats Canada data doesn't capture that, so we know it's much higher.
Wow, that's significant. That's right up there with the mental health statistics, where 25% of the population at some point in time is experiencing a mental health challenge. So it's important that we kind of beam in, because as time goes on, the problem gets larger, and maybe government doesn't have the ability to cope with it. What brought you into this line of service?
So this is my 24th year working in the nonprofit sector in New Brunswick. I grew up in Montreal, Eastern Ontario, and then came out to university 26 years ago, 25 years ago, something around there, and had a job offer to work in the nonprofit sector following graduation, and the rest is history. Growing up, my mom lived with a neurological condition, so I like to say I always saw the world very differently. I experienced as a child child, the stigmatization and the bullying because our mother was different. We still have that in communities, but I think one of my life purposes is to make sure that families never have to go through what we did, having to battle the stigma, having to navigate programs, having to get funding for equipment, find the best care. Even as a well-educated family, it was really tough to navigate. So that's kind of when I was drawn to this job at Ability New Brunswick 14 years ago for that reason.
Yeah, well, it's amazing that you've been with the organization for that long, because you obviously know it well and how to work the system, which, as you say, is a challenge. If you don't know anything about the system, it can be really defeating, overwhelming. What do you find are the biggest challenges that people who live with mobility disabilities face?
So in an ideal world, Ability NB would shut the lights off and not be needed because our systems and programs and communities would be really responsive and supportive. But the fact that although we've made advances in human rights, in rehabilitation, in technology, inclusion, despite all the advances that have been made in those areas, we still see many, many roadblocks. And so access to equal employment opportunities for people with a disability, access to post-secondary education, high levels of poverty, lack of accessible transportation to be able to get to medical appointments, jobs, school. There's still so many, and then inaccessible communities compound all of that, increasing isolation and impacting health. So affordable, accessible housing is one of the biggest issues that we're working on right now. And we have a home support shortage crisis in New Brunswick. So imagine having the second highest rate of disability and having a home support worker crisis of people that want to live in their homes with support. So I try to balance the good and the areas where we need to go, but that's the reason why our lights are on, because all of these, systemic issues still exist.
It seems as though those issues reflect community at large, not just people dealing with disabilities, but all of these issues we all cope with. And I think that if you have a physical disability, it just makes it that much worse, and sadly increases the suffering involved. So what are the resources available for people who have disabilities, especially mobility disabilities? Because I have a feeling that there may be a lot of resources that we don't know about. I hope.
It's quite interesting that in our internal systems at Ability New Brunswick, there's over 5,000 resources available for people with a disability in New Brunswick, depending on their goals. If it's adapted recreation, if it's financial benefits, if it's funding for equipment, if it's food security, so it's really tough to navigate that. So, for people with a mobility disability in New Brunswick, I could name programs all day, but some of the really important ones are, individuals looking to go to post-secondary and jobs. There's great programs available through Working New Brunswick that provide funding for occupational therapy assessments and to get technology and equipment, maybe to help with transportation. If you're going to, if you're living in St. Stephen and you go to UNB, go from flat St. Stephen to a campus how do you get around using a manual wheelchair? You're probably going to need some type of motorized device. I know I used to have classes at the top and the bottom, right? So there's some great funding programs to help address those roadblocks that get in the way of being able to participate. There's housing programs offered by the provincial government. There's so many community organizations that offer, maybe it's food programs, maybe it's help to create a device to have you be more independent at home. There's so many federal benefits that people don't know they're eligible for, and that's what bothers us the most, that people could be receiving benefits that they've paid into, but no one's ever told them they exist. So there's a real variety of programs and services based on people's individual interests and needs.
So does your organization kind of do an intake if somebody presents with I can't get around, I need some help in some way? and then you can hook them up with the resource?
Exactly. I'll tell you a little bit about some of our programs and services, but so one of our primary programs is rehabilitation counseling, and that's essentially a planner, a guide, a navigator. If you get diagnosed with a mobility disability, you can call, or your occupational therapist or your doctor can call and refer you to our organization, and within a few weeks we'll send someone out to meet with you, to sit at the kitchen table and talk about what your needs and goals are. Maybe you need equipment, some housing adaptations, maybe you're struggling to cope with the diagnosis. Maybe you want to talk to a peer that's also had, so maybe someone's had a stroke and they want to talk to someone else who's had a stroke and overcome some of the challenges. So it's really person-centered. We develop a plan with the individual and we start to implement it. Some of it may be accessing government resources, but actually our research is showing that only 1 of every 20 goals we help people with is government funded. So those community resources you asked about, there's foundations, there's all kinds of programs that we can help people tap into.
So with the resources that are available, how many of the field workers, so to speak, do you have that can go to the kitchen table with people and suss things out?
We have 10 frontline staff that deliver services throughout New Brunswick. So, and every time we get a new resource, you might see that we don't have an office in Charlotte County, and that's very purposeful. Because if we get a grant, instead of opening an office and paying the internet and the telephone, we invest in people that can go to the kitchen table, because that's where people want services. So right now, for example, in this region, we have 2 staff, one that serves adults and seniors and one that serves youth. But we have 10 that provide service throughout New Brunswick. We go from Grand Manan to Miscou Island and left and right in between.
Is it a challenge keeping up with the demand?
It is. Right now, we don't do a lot of marketing and advertising. I even know from being on today that we're going to get some calls because people didn't know about us. I'm not so naive to think that everyone knows about us. A word of mouth, the health professionals we work with, social development programs, are constantly getting new referrals for people that need our support, and finding people that would have benefited from our support a long time ago. We are struggling. In terms of 14 years ago, we had 2 staff frontline for the province, and we're now at 10, and I could use 5 more. Because it doesn't matter how educated we are, navigating services and finding the right programs and having someone that understand your disability and what you're going through and link you to the right supports is just so critical.
Yeah. Well, recently I ran across a situation with a young man with physical disability who needed some assistance. And I didn't know about Ability New Brunswick, and what we wound up doing was contacting the MLA in his particular area. And that particular MLA could not have been more helpful. And so I'm wondering whether or not, because I know you found us, so to speak, through Kathy Bacchus, our MLA. I'm just wondering whether that's a route that you recommend to people, or now that people know about Ability New Brunswick, they can just call you directly, of course. But is that pathway one that's used frequently?
We certainly, people can call us directly. We have a 1-800 line. We have a website. But what's interesting in New Brunswick is our MLA offices are really community hubs. So Ability MB every election does a road show and goes around and tries to meet with every MLA. And it's not politicking. It's really to tell them how we can work with them to help constituents. So since the election, we're still, I think, about 3/4 of the way through. So we might not have reached that MLA. But it is really important route for education, because I find in New Brunswick, unlike what I hear in other provinces, we call our MLA's office to help navigate and find certain programs. So, it is an important education pathway for Ability New Brunswick to make sure our MLAs know, but people also can reach out to us directly. And we want to be part of the community solutions because we have 65 years of expertise. We're not better than anyone. We've just been in this sandbox so long that we know a lot of the best supports and the best pathways.
Well, I would think you'd be an enormous asset to whatever administration happens to be holding the office. It's a non-political, it should be certainly a non-political challenge that you're dealing with. So every administration, hopefully, is helpful. One of the things that I'm wondering is, what has the impact of COVID-19 been on the community of people with disabilities? I can only imagine that it's been dreadful, but you're in the trenches, so.
It's interesting that the phrase, the new normal, a lot of our service participants, those living with a mobility disability, will tell me, new normal, I've been isolated for years, right? And that's really powerful to me, because it's almost like the general population is catching up to see how isolating it can be when there's something impacting, your ability, your potential to move about communities, etc. We did a pandemic survey with our population throughout New Brunswick, and I took the look at the data for Charlotte County, and it was very similar to the rest of the province. We saw an increase in people experiencing mental health escalations, close to 60% identifying having experienced anxiety, depression, other mental health difficulties during the pandemic. We saw an increase in people experiencing food insecurity. Their natural supports had dried up. Neighbors weren't able to provide support, or family couldn't get to them. Home support workers weren't able to fill their shifts because maybe they had to take care of their own families, or in the home support worker, it was actually more lucrative to be on the CERB benefit than provide home support. So there was a lot of those challenges. So a lot of our population experienced food insecurity issues. We were really thankful to the federal government and the United Ways for this region as well. The United Ways St. John, King Charlotte was amazing at helping get us funds to provide assistive technology, devices like jar openers, reachers, lift chairs, if individuals needed help getting up and down and maybe didn't have someone to provide support all day. But food as well. We have amazing food banks in the province, but for our population, they need nutritious food. We bought a lot of whole chickens during the pandemic, where people could make multiple meals. Some foods that aren't often available at food banks. So food insecurity was another issue, because we take for granted how many people are in our personal networks that might help us out with a meal, or pick up groceries, or drive us to get our groceries. The last thing I'll mention was access to government services. Our government, provincial government, really struggled in the early stages of the pandemic. We're not ready with technology to be able to answer phones and respond to our most vulnerable citizens. So we certainly saw a high level of people disappointed that our systems were not there for them when they needed them the most. There's been a lot of work done by government, social development, to improve that since the first 3-4 months of the pandemic. It was a big learning for everyone, but I think that's what kept me up at night the most as a citizen, because we have a lot of these, our taxes pay for these services to be responsive and there for people that need them the most. And if you needed to screen into MB housing in the early stages of the pandemic, there wasn't anyone to take the call. You weren't allowed to, when we saw so many job losses, so many people lose housing. So I say that negative spin, but it's been so much learning that this province is going to be ready if this occurs again.
Well, it is. Well, let's hope that doesn't happen. But I think your point that you've discovered, that people have discovered, communities have discovered people living in isolation that have been living in isolation for many, many years. So the pandemic seems to have exacerbated this and raised awareness, which is great. One of the questions, though, that comes to mind is the burnout for the frontline workers, because to my view is that those people they don't have the support that they need to sustain their work ability. So I'm just wondering how your organization is coping with all of that, and how you help your frontline workers and yourself.
Thank you. One of the things I think, having worked in I call it our New Brunswick's third pillar, right? There's government, there's business, and then there's the nonprofit sector. I'm biased, but it's a pretty important sector. And I think it's been forgotten on a lot of levels in the province. Most nonprofits didn't have a choice but to pivot and get back out providing services right away, because we're most of nonprofits, whether you're in food security, housing, disability, mental health, you're there to support the most vulnerable. So, for our team, I remember within an hour of the state of emergency, we had designated one staff as an essential service staff to answer every call coming into our office. Thanks to corporations, we had laptops and iPhones and iPads, because we're always looking for donations, to help us have a technology plan and be able to go and offer those services from home. And then within a few weeks, we had all the precautions we needed, and we were back out curbside visits and then back at the kitchen table. It wasn't easy. We all dealt with uncomfortableness, anxiety. Some of us dealt with depression. Some of us dealt with compassion fatigue. And I really feel as a whole, people have forgot about that sector because really we had no choice but to step up and do that. Mind you, as someone leading a nonprofit organization, we really focused on self-care for our team. We had mindfulness seminars. We had a cooking class that we all took online to take a break from, listening and responding to traumas all day. We really focused on a team every week, every month of what we could do to help lift each other up and avoid that burnout. But you see it in government, you see it compassion fatigue. There's a lot of vulnerable people needing help, and it's a real problem in this province. And I like to say Ability MB, waded through it well, but we weren't immune to everything that was going on. But I'm very proud of the team, because they really stepped up and say, this is what we're built to do, and if we can't support people right now, who is going to do that?
Yeah. Well, that's remarkable. I would think that whatever the plan that you put into place to support your staff would be a good model, perhaps for others to to use. One of the things that you mentioned was that you always need donations, which is not a surprise. Do you have a vehicle for accepting donations, and perhaps like a wish list, like I need 40 boxes of Band-Aids or whatever it might be? Is that available for people? Because I know a lot of people would like to help, I'm sure, if they knew what you needed.
I love that, and nonprofits, we always need money, but we do keep wish lists of things that are important. So we, on our website, www.abilitymb.ca, people can go on and make a monthly donation, a one-time donation, and they can actually designate it for the county or the community they're in, and we make sure that happens. So that's something that's available. We're on social media. We're on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, and a reason I mention that is there's a lot of people that maybe are in a position to give money, but they follow our pages because sometimes we need other help. We had a call up for some bookcases for someone that finally got his first home and moved out of a homeless shelter. Towels. Sometimes we got an iPad donated for someone to be able, that doesn't use words to communicate, to be able to use the iPad for communication, but the donation didn't come with a cord, so we had to ask for that. So we're always putting out notices of things like that, because we're a big believer in recycling, and it's amazing when you put out a notice and need a microwave or what we can find in our back storage closet. So there's always things like that. So if people are on social media, they can take a watch for that, and maybe they have something in their closet that they can help us with.
What if they want to help themselves, help you rather? Are there opportunities to be helpful? Because I think as time goes on, peer support is going to be taking a lot more of the burden than it currently does. But I was encouraged by you saying that only 20% of the programs are supported by the government. Which means that you have a system that's working outside of the government, which is helpful. But so how can people get involved if they want to?
Yeah, so actually about 70% of our funding does come from different government departments on services we deliver, but at 30% it comes from our fundraising dollars. So we always are looking for people to help, whether we'll put up a volunteer opportunity on our social media, whether it's our board of directors, whether it's people to help with office help, whether it's people, to help with, we have an adapted sport and recreation equipment loan service where we're always needing people to help maintain, deliver equipment throughout the province. You and I can go and buy a bicycle today at Canadian Tire or Walmart for $150. A hand cycle is $3,000. So it's very cost prohibitive to people. So we have this provincial adapted sport and recreation equipment loan service where people can call, order it for free anywhere in the province, and we can deliver it to them to use for up to a month or longer. So we're always looking for volunteers that like to tinker and change wheels and help maintain that equipment because it's so costly and we want it to be around a long time.
Right. Well, Hailey, thank you so much for coming down today and talking to us about Ability New Brunswick. I think people have a much better idea now of your organization and what you do and what they can do to help you. And thank you all for watching this episode today, and I look forward to seeing you again on another episode of Fundy Tidings.